So I'm Matt, and the question I want to pose today is, how are we preparing the next generation? I don't think in this presentation today that I'm going to answer all of it, but my goal and my hope, my sincerest hope, is that we'd start a dialogue with the global Joomla tribe and the larger global tech community around this. And you could insert not just technology, but really anyone coming up after us. I firmly believe, and this is, I might be wrong, right or wrong on this, is that it's our responsibility to really help the next generation, the next ones coming up behind us as they prepare to enter into the workforce. And so that's sort of the premise of today's presentation. Technical skills, and I think we can all agree on this, especially when you think of a student who leaves high school or leaves post-secondary school, whether it's college or university, the technical skills are, of course, important and really good, especially when you think of the fields that we're in. But technical skills alone, and I've heard this time and time again from leaders now across the world, is that it's technical skills alone aren't just enough. That sometimes they really need a little bit more. And when you think of those I call them the non-cognitive skills, but we might hear of them as called soft skills or other ways to define it. But those non-cognitive skills or those soft skills really can, for an individual, be a make or break in their career. Without it, can be very career limiting for that individual. And more importantly, as business owners and people who are running their own industry and running their own firms, not having those non-cognitive skills actually costs us money and can really impact the bottom line for us. Now, I am not most technical. Back in my day, if I got the 12 flashing on my VCR, I was the only one in the household who knew how to do that. I was considered technical, and talking about Commodore 64, I was the only one who could load Summer Olympics on the Commodore 64 back in my day. So that was the how technically I guess apt that I was at that point. But what I want to do today, my goal over the next few minutes, is to share my journey. Over the years now, I've had a bit of an interesting career in many different industries, and I want to share a little bit about that because I think it's helped inform my own mindset in terms of developing and helping and coaching and building up the proteges that I have able to develop. And so with the right mindset, what can we do? So who is the big fat bearded guy? I haven't really talked about that. My name's Matt Stewart. Currently, my most current role right now is I'm the manager of student success for a small digital arts college not too far from here in Vancouver. Variety of different programs, but I have had a variety of roles. This is actually my first time in post-secondary. So where I'm from, it's about, depending on how fast you drive, 3.5, 4 hours over some high mountain passes in a small town called Kelowna, BC. And in Kelowna, at this particular school, that post-secondary school that I'm working at now, we have a variety of programs, and it's very much a career-driven school, and really around the digital realm. So we have an animation program. So students who go into this program decide that, hey, they want to go work on animation for games or go work in big movies, and many of them do. We also have a graphic design and web development program, hence the connection with Joomla in terms of the web design and graphic design. As well, we also have an audio engineering program. So if you saw any of the gentlemen walking around the conference this week with the black shirts that said PSAV, actually some of my grads are working here today, which is kind of nice. We also have a digital film making program, a digital photography program, and so much more. I mean, it goes interior design. We even have, if anything, a veterinary hospital assistance program. So it's all very much a career-based college, for the most part around that digital realm or that technology realm. And what my team does is, as a team of success coaches, is we work one-on-one with every student in that school. And we've taken an interesting approach because I don't think, and at least when we were doing our research on this, we haven't found any school in Canada that took this executive coach mindset with the students in terms of working one-on-one with them. There are a few schools in the US that do it, but they do it all remotely. And we also take a very different tinge in that we work with the student before they even arrive on campus. So what I mean by that is oftentimes you'll have a student who's still in high school, will apply to the school, get accepted into the school, but it might be several months out before their first day on campus. So what my team will do is we will have regular one-on-one conversations, usually over the phone or over Skype or some other online medium, and we talk about the mindset, and we talk about what it's going to take to be successful once they leave their comfort zone of high school, or for some of them, they're coming back to school after several years in the workforce, and what it's going to take to be successful for them when they arrive on day one. And of course, we work with them during, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a bit. But another thing we do as well is we don't just, once they graduate, say, go out into the world and you're done. What we do is we work with them afterwards, whether that might be on resume prep, or maybe it could be something around they're writing an RPF, and we work with them on that. So we don't just cut and dry them once they graduate. We do work with them on a one-on-one basis on whatever it might be that they're looking to work on. But what we don't do, and this might be easier to define instead of just what we do, but what we don't do. We're not a guidance counselor service, at least not with that mindset. Certainly if the student came and they needed some guidance, that's something that we could provide, but it's not our main focus. We like to take that executive coaching mindset with them. We're also not therapists, so I don't really care about their relationship with their mother, or if their boyfriend left them, or if the dog died or something. This is about something very different that we work with them on. And if they do need to see a therapist, we've got resources, and we can help within the community get them to see the resources that they need. We're also not life coaches. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with life coaching, but life coaching is very different from the executive coaching mindset. Life coaching typically assumes that the person needs more guidance in terms of the direction of what they want to do and where their passion is. And we take the assumption, right or wrong, that the student coming to our school knows what they want. They're not going to pay this kind of money to go to a digital art school and learn animation or learn graphic design and just think, I'm wondering what I'm going to do. There's no general arts and sciences kind of programs at the school. So we don't take a life coaching approach to it. It's a very different approach. And we're also not, we're not doctors. So one of the things we are seeing an increase over the years is a lot of mental health issues in post-secondary. We're seeing a lot of other, if you could see the bags of medication that the kids come in with nowadays, it's very different than when I was in school in terms of the medications that we were taking. But we're not doctors, so we definitely make sure that we're very clear. So that's a lot of in terms of what we don't do. What we do, bottom line it. It's all about getting that client, and I call them clients. I don't call them students, but for the purposes today, I'll call them students. We make these students, or my client, take action, whatever the action that might be, really helping them focus on whatever that goal is for them, and we laser focus on what are the specific actions, what are the specific behaviors they need to take. And so it's very, very simple. Imagine, let's say you have two students in the exact same program. And let's say, for purposes of this conference, we'll say a graphic design web development program. So they're taking the exact same technical courses all throughout their year at the school. The exact same, and there might be some customization because one might take a few extra different elective courses, but all in all, the experience is the same. Where my team can step in and really be a differentiator for them in terms of their development is, imagine, let's say the one student wants to be an entrepreneur. They want to be a freelancer. They want to go and just do their own business, as building their own websites, doing their own graphic design, and just working for themselves. The other one, the exact same program, wants to go work, let's say, at a big agency here in Vancouver, Toronto, or New York. Now, they're going to get the same technical education. But when they sit down one-on-one with a coach, what we're going to do is we're going to laser focus them on what are those behaviors that are going to help them lead to success after they graduate. So for the entrepreneur, for example, what we have tended to work on with those with the entrepreneur is, what is the entrepreneurial mindset? How do you get out there and market yourself? How do you network, and network from the perspective of trying to build net new clients? How to build your business? How to build out your plan? How do you respond to an RPF? So these are all things that we can, in a one-on-one session with the student, really work on developing those other skills around that. Now, let's say the one student who wants to go work at a creative agency, we might work on networking, and we do work on networking. But now that networking takes a different lens, and that how do you network with the sole purpose of getting a job in that industry, and maybe if you know what agency you want to work at that particular agency or group of agencies. How do you do informational interviews with people at that company? How do you go when you introduce yourself? How do you introduce yourself? How do you carry yourself when you walk into a networking event? So these are all things that we can do. I'll go 2 students in the exact same program, but one-on-one with a coach, we can coach them through what it might be to be successful given the path that they want to take after school. So I want to share with you a little bit about my journey. I was talking about that earlier in terms of how I got here. Because I have not, this is actually the year that I've been doing this, it's the first time I've worked in a school environment. I've had a very varied career. So I started my career actually in healthcare. In fact, I was in Calgary, which is in Alberta, one province over, and I worked training new nurses and allied health professionals. My focus was in internal medicine. In fact, I had a responsibility for just over 9,000 employees at the Calgary Health Region back in the day. And it was actually one day when maybe some of you guys know this banner ads. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but a banner ad came up on a website and it says, "Do you want to work for Team 2010? Click here." I clicked. Next thing I knew, I had an interview the next day. It was March 11th, and I had moved from Calgary, sold everything pretty much, and came here to Vancouver to work on the 2010 Winter Olympics. And so I did that for many, many years, working with the organizing committee. And it was a wonderful and a very exciting opportunity. If you watched the Olympics, if you saw anybody in one of those blue jackets, hopefully we did Canada proud. They would have gone through one of the training programs that I was responsible for. So whether that was an orientation to the games or role-specific training or training for the venue or for anyone who was a leader at the game, they would have gone through specific leadership during an Olympics training with me, which is interesting when you think of the scale and scope. That was about 54,000 individuals or 54,000 specific individual training plans that had to be implemented before the games. And here's a little pre-beard me back in the day before I started growing facial hair. So that was me doing all of this. And then it was interesting, and that was in the lead up to the games, so the years leading up. But during the last 3 months, or what we called the operational phase of the games, I took on a different role. And in that role, I worked with the competition venues here in the city. So I was a mobile operations supervisor for the city-based venues. So if you watched curling or figure skating, speed skating, both short or long, hockey, that was an interesting venue to be at. I've never been hugged by so many straight men in my life during when we won that game, as well as the opening and closing ceremonies. So these are the venues that I was responsible for. And it was interesting. I loved it. It was a wonderful experience. And coming out of it, I actually had a job lined up. I had a job offer even before the game started. And it was really neat. And again, it was going into a very different industry. For those who don't know, in Canada back in 2010, we were experiencing, from a banking perspective, a really huge mind shift change. The big banks really started to decide, we want to change the way we lead. We want to change the way we even think of our customers. So they started bringing in people like myself to help coach and develop their senior leadership team. And so I got an opportunity to become an executive coach working with the big banks. And one of the interesting things is in 2010, it was just a few years after the 2008 collapse, and Canada was making, our banks anyway, were making a huge advance into the US. So Toronto Dominion Bank went all down the East Coast. If anyone goes to a Boston Bruins game, you know that it's the TD Arena that the Boston Bruins play in. And BMO, Bank of Montreal, made a big swift throughout the US Midwest, all throughout Chicago, Milwaukee, going all the way down to Houston and as far west out into California. And so they made a big play, and so I was able to be a part of that, working with the senior banking leaders as an executive coach. What I did is I worked with them on success, but not just success, but helping them reframe what success looked like for them. And it was a huge mind shift change for some of these banks that have been operating for over 100 years. And I worked with the senior leaders on specific micro actions. So what behaviors were they going to take to achieve that larger vision? And that's where I got my chops anyway, from an executive coach perspective, working with senior executives right from the CEO right down to the branch level in their operations. And I loved it. I got to coach all across North America. This itinerary here, this would be a typical 2-week itinerary, just traveling around, living out of my suitcase. And I loved it. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it. And I thought I was at the pinnacle of my success. I'd just come off a successful Olympics, and now here I am being flown around North America, meeting business leaders. And when I talk about meeting business leaders, I got to work with Warren Buffett. And that, let me tell you, that was an experience. And being a part of not just million-dollar deals, but billion-dollar deals. So I thought this was just the world. I thought that was amazing. Now, as you can imagine, doing lots of traveling, it can take an impact on your health. And one of the things I was experiencing is I was starting to feel a bit run down. And as I was traveling around North America, one of the things, and the poor people who had to clean my room, I was wetting the bed, but not from the waist down, but from the neck up. And I never experienced that before, and that was something consistent. And that happened consistently for about 3 months or so before I decided to go to a walk-in clinic. So I thought, you know what, maybe I'm just not shaking this bug. Maybe something's up. And it was here, after a couple of tests going back and forth into the walk-in clinic, that I finally got asked to come in to meet a doctor. Now, full disclosure, that's not the doctor that I met with, but the doctor I did meet with had a very similar look. And for me, during that period, it was almost as if, I don't know if you ever watched Charlie Brown, you know, when the teachers would talk, it was like what she was saying I really wasn't processing. I honestly thought she was calling me Luke Skywalker. And something about musical therapy. And it didn't take me a few minutes, and what they told me, that was shock. But what she told me is I had leukemia, and that there's no known curative therapy. Bottom line, it was there's no cure. You know, how do you handle that type of news? And I'll be honest, I didn't probably, you know, as advanced I like to think I am, I did not handle it well necessarily. So this is actually Toronto, and this is when I lived in Toronto, Dundas Square here. I actually lived down Dundas Street, just a little ways from here. And that was the most surreal walk home. I actually went back to work, by the way. And I actually didn't tell anyone for a couple of days. I can't believe I actually worked right after seeing the doctor. But that walk home, I mean, I was bumping into people. And just the next street over, Jarvis Street, it's like 6 lanes. I actually stopped and had a little cry, because I wasn't too sure how do you process that. Normally when you have cancer, it's like, oh yeah, you've got an 85% chance, we can cut it out. This was, no, it's incurable. So what do I do with this? Thankfully, though, I have a wonderful partner, and we did a lot of Netflix binging. I have to say Netflix probably saved me mentally, just being able to binge watch a lot of shows. And I had a wonderful dog who, and still to this day, he loves the fact that now I don't travel as much, and I was home, and that really helped. But I'll be honest, I did go to some dark places. And it would be very easy for me to use that leukemia, that cancer, as an excuse for things. And I certainly could see that. But I was in a really weird place. How do you make plans with this? What's the next steps with this? How do you buy a house? Like, seriously, when you go get a mortgage? All these things start going through. And so I came back to this mantra I had developed back when I worked in healthcare, which was there's no excuses. And I would hear this all the time from the nurses and from the doctors, always with their excuse. And I would always say, no. Okay, I get that happened. And you don't coach the story. If you don't coach the story, you don't talk to that. You talk about the now what. And it's the same thing we had during the Olympics. During the Olympics, we had a lot of excuses. If anyone watched the opening ceremonies, we kind of buggered that one up. If anyone watched that, with the cauldron coming up, we had poor Katrina Lemay-Doan, one of Canada's Olympic gold medalists, was supposed to light one of the cauldron arms, and of course it didn't happen. Well, okay, no excuses. We couldn't have helped that. By the way, it did come up, by the way. Just NBC had cut to the next Seinfeld episode or something after that point, and then most people had gone home. So instead, our now what during the Olympics was to go and make fun of it during the closing ceremonies. So this no excuses now what has been a huge mantra. I use that all throughout my time in global finance, working in banking, and one that I've also brought now to the school as well. But it was here, even before I got to the school, I had to go to the hospital. It's Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto. It's Canada's largest cancer center, and a full day of tests. For MRIs, they had to extract bone marrow from my hip, and just a whole series of tests. And if you've ever been on one of these tables, it's probably one of the most lonely experiences that I've ever had anyway. But it was when I was actually on one of the examination tables that something interesting happened. Because Princess Margaret is connected to the University of Toronto, it's a teaching hospital. So again, full disclosure, this is not the actual team that treated me, but very similar in that it had a senior resident and a bunch of other doctors who worked with me. And it was amazing to watch what that senior doctor did. She didn't just give the answer. She didn't just tell them what to do. She helped with Socratic-like questions that really helped guide them as they diagnosed and fully tried to figure out what was going on, and in terms of what the next steps were going to be for me in terms of the cancer treatment. It was really beautiful to watch, and it was amazing because I was like, that's exactly what I do with my clients. And these are CEOs, these are bank managers and leaders, and yet she's doing this with the next generation. And it was working beautifully in terms of this is how they prepared the next generation of doctors. Anyway, it got me thinking. So at that time, we decided that we were going to leave Toronto and come back to BC. Although I didn't want to go back to another big city like Vancouver or Toronto, so we ended up settling on Kelowna. And this here is where I am now. If you don't know Kelowna, very beautiful, beautiful mountains. It's got a beautiful lake, lots of wineries, and lots of bears and cougars, although not the same kind of bears and cougars you'd see on Davie Street here in Vancouver. But for me, this was a much slower pace of life and something that worked better for me. When we moved to Kelowna, I didn't have a job yet, but it was at this school that was looking for someone part-time for just 3 hours a week. And then I came on board, and then within very quickly in having conversations, we decided and we talked about why not trying some form of executive coaching with the students. And so what I've been able to do in the past year is really build out from scratch, because this doesn't exist in Canada, and we can't really find anything similar in the world, a success coaching program with the executive coaching mindset. So I could have made a decision to continue on and help these guys out. But for me, bottom line, that usually meant that was helping them get their big bonus, so they got their third home down in Arizona or in the Caribbean. Or I could help someone very different. Someone who was at the start of their career and was really energized and excited to get out, but maybe all they were getting from the school was just the technical skills. How could we help them with that professional development? How could we help them really refine what it is that they're trying to work on and really do it on an individual one-on-one basis? So the formula is very simple. And I think this is a formula that cannot, just not in schools, but could be used in corporations. It could be used anywhere. And that formula is simple. It's a conversation. Conversation that happens one-on-one with that individual, and it happens for 15 minutes on a regular ongoing basis. And what we talk about, it's up to them. So whatever is top of mind for my client, or they can also pick from an a la carte menu of things that we have determined that employers are looking for. In fact, we've actually built this now into the curriculum where they have to pass this curriculum in terms of the competencies in order to actually pass and graduate now. So some of the things we work on: feedback. How do you give feedback? How do you give feedback from the perspective of actually impacting behavior? So it's focused on behavior, not your opinion of the behavior. And another thing that's even more important is how do you receive feedback? The feedback we got from industry at the school was that a lot of our grads didn't receive feedback well. I don't know if you've ever worked with someone who didn't receive feedback well, but it can be impactful to limiting that individual's career, and more importantly, impacting the bottom line for the business. And so what we do is we work with the students one-on-one on feedback and giving and receiving feedback and talking that out. Another big one is conflict resolution. So what we'll do is we'll work with them around, are they aware of their own natural conflict resolution style? Are they aware that other people have different communication styles themselves and maybe handle conflict differently? What does that look like? So in a one-on-one coaching session, we'll work this out. We also help them, and this is a big one, is networking. I firmly believe connections equal opportunities. So many students that I talk to just think, you know what, I'm going to wait till I graduate and then apply with my resume, cover letter, my demo reel. And I'm like, no, the best way is to meet people, make those connections even before you graduate so that they know who you are. And that's far more impactful, I think, than waiting for it to be posted on some website, that position. tap into that hidden job market. And so we really, in fact, we actually, myself and my team, will actually go to networking events with the students and then provide in the moment coaching to them in terms of how they're doing, how do they pitch themselves, how do they introduce themselves. When they hand out their business card, do they just hand it out and do a pray and spray, or do they hand it out with a call to action? And so these are all the different things that we coach them on. I also help them, I mean, they are, hopefully most of them are going to get a job interview when they graduate. And so we, as coaches, will bring a video camera, we'll tape them, and then provide coaching to them afterwards on some mock panel interviews. Another thing we work with them on, I love this, I threw this in, an oldie, Stephen Covey, and it's amazing to see this next generation take to some of the things that is in this book. And then another one as well is we work on branding. Now, I'm not talking about branding from the perspective of what's on the website, but from an individual perspective. What is your brand? How do you communicate who you are and what it is that you do and why you do it? And so these are things that in these one-on-one coaching sessions, and these are just a small example that we can offer to our clients, the students. So yeah, student action plans, what we do is we say, okay, what do you want? What are those success factors? How are we going to get you there, those early and lagging indicators? But mostly in the coaching session, because we only have 15 minutes with them on a regular basis, it's moving them to take action, whatever that action might be. And it really comes back down to no excuses, now what? It's interesting. Now the fact that I have this incurable form of cancer, I'm constantly playing the cancer card. And it's kind of funny in a way. They'll come to me going, oh, I didn't get my assignments in on time because I had a sniffle this weekend. I'm like, no. I've got incurable form of cancer. You can't play that card. But it really comes down to just not listening to the story of the excuse, because they all have sad stories, and I get that. Everyone has a story. It's now moving past that story into what action are you going to actually take. And so it all comes down to this. Another one that my coaches and we work with the students on is how are they framing it, or what is their mindset? And we could use this in a variety of different situations. And I know that it might sound like we're going to hug a tree and kiss puppies and go sing Kumbaya and take our shoes off on the beach. But I firmly believe that how you frame it will impact what you do. I'll give you an example that just happened this week. So on Wednesday, I had this one client, a student, come in and she was crying. She was an animation student and she had worked hours and hours and hours on this short little animation, and the instructor gave her some feedback that she didn't like. And she framed it as, he hates me. She was like, Matt, he hates me. What am I going to do? He hates me. And she was just in tears. And I only have 15 minutes because I have another client coming, so I'm not going to sit there and just listen and coach the story. So I asked her, how is she framing it? And she goes, well, he hates me. That's just the way it is. That was her reality. So I challenged her and I said, if you were to frame that differently, would what you do coming out of it change? And I sat there. It was very awkward silence for a few minutes. And so she goes, okay, well, maybe he's just trying to help prepare me for the realities of the animation industry. And I said, yeah, maybe, do you think? But just think about that. Would it actually impact you? So, and I said, Friday was the holiday here, so she didn't have to go to school. So I got an email from her on Saturday morning, and she goes, oh my goodness, Matt, I've just been so excited. And I'm going to have to check in with her on Monday, tomorrow, and find out what happened. But she said, as she started framing it as something positive, she was so excited to work on it. Now, yes, she would have probably still worked on that animation over the long weekend. But if she had that frame of mind of, he hates me, and she had that anger in her gut, what impact would that have on the animation? I'm going to find out tomorrow to see if, now that she changed her frame of mind, what impact that had on the final product. And I'm hoping that it did have an impact, and I personally think it did. I get this. I'll fully admit it. I know I'm not going to impact every student. I'll be honest, some of them are challenging. There's days where they sit in my office and I'm not too sure if are their lights on. I mean, I hate to say that. But I actually think that, you know what, I'll share here. No, I'm going to share a story. I had this network security student who I had him for 6 months. So I didn't have him at the beginning, so I had him maybe midway through, but I had him for 6 months, and we met on a bi-weekly basis. And I honestly, for him, I did not think he got anything that we talked about. I really didn't. And at the end, he graduated, and like many of the network security guys, they got 100% placement. So he was placed in a job right away. And about 6 weeks after he graduated, he had to come back to pick up his transcripts, and he came into my office. Now, he came into that office lit up. It was the first time I had actually seen a spark in this client's eye. He was just so full of joy. He was so happy. He went to me and goes, Matt, oh my goodness, I meet with my manager once a week. And he goes, Matt, guess what we talk about? Feedback. And we talk about how we give feedback. We talk about how to work well together on a team. He says, guess what else we did? We did something called True Colors, and we also did Strengths Finders, and we did all these things talking about personality and how you interact with a team. And he goes, I was blown away that a network security company would be doing this. And of course, I'm just thinking, like, of course, it only makes sense. But it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful to see him come alive through that. Even though in that 6 months I had him, I don't think he really understood or got the importance of what we were talking about. So I'm framing this personally as a success. Yes, maybe not all students are going to get it and action on the things that we're going to talk about with them as their executive coach, but maybe we're just planting that seed. And it might take some time after they leave us and go out into the community, and when you hire them, that maybe that will take some fruition, and then things will start coming together for them. So I just leave it there. I don't know if I've answered this question yet, but I think I'm hoping that we've started the conversation around how are we preparing the next generation. And I'd love to continue this conversation. So I've got my contact up there. If anyone is interested, I'd love to continue this conversation. I'd love to take this further in terms of just what impact having a personalized, hyper-customized conversation with the next generation to help them deliver on their goals. So thank you so much. Cheers. Do we have time for, oh yeah, of course we have time for questions. I'm probably short. Any questions or? And I have business cards too. If not, because yeah.
When you kind of ask, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just for the video recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you're doing the reframe, do you ever give them ideas for looking at learnings or opportunities, or you just have to?
I try not to. So as a coach, one of the things I try not to is give the answer, just like the lead resident, lead oncologist that worked with me. She never gave the other younger doctors or the clinical clerks any answers. And I try to do that the same. Some of them might need, I'll be honest, might need a little prodding because they don't have the context yet. They try to frame it in terms of the context and how they see the world given their limited experience. But for the most part, I leave it to them. Just like I did with the animation student. Just if you were to frame it differently, what would you do? And she came up with, well, he's probably trying to help me out. Probably because he had planted that seed and saying, I'm just trying to help you out. But I try not to. Because I find if I do, then I'm just enabling that hand-holding. And it's one thing that we are trying to mitigate with this any generation, but mitigate the hand-holding, because that was a big complaint we heard from industry, from our grads, was that they just were handheld right from elementary school, high school, college, and then businesses don't have time to handhold. So I try to not do that. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but yeah. Yeah.
And they're just not getting it.
Yeah.
Questions would you use without holding their hand?
One of the things I do is instead of me, I make them do informational chats or informational interviews with people in their industry. And that's actually, now we made that a program requirement for them. And that's actually a question I want them to ask. Because it's one thing coming from me, but oftentimes I see that they see me as just an extension of their father. I'm just an uncle who's just saying the same thing their parents say. But it's so interesting when they do the informational interviews or chats with people in their industry, how quickly that mind shift changes versus me telling them. Because now I'm just the fourth person who's told them. But now, no, buddy from Rack Force or whatever is telling them this. Then all of a sudden, oh, we believe you now. Yeah. So right or wrong, I don't know, but it's just the approach that we take. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
It's more of a comment
Mhm.
than a question, but I wish I'd had, and I will use this strategy again myself with regards to my daughter,
Okay.
because she's often been in that position too, where she's blamed the teachers for things that
Yeah.
went wrong in her,
Yeah.
her school year, and just the suggestion of reframing it, looking at
Yeah.
it a little differently, and not taking it personally
Right.
is a good way to redirect that energy
Yeah.
and that negative impression that she's misinterpreting.
I often also ask a coaching question. So you just talked about energy. Is what's the value of your energy now as you frame it that way? And it's interesting because they don't think in those terms, right? And as soon as I say, well, how are you framing it differently? And where's your energy going? Because often when they're angry, their energy is going somewhere completely in the wrong place. Yeah. That's interesting. But I also, on the flip side of that, we also see a lot, and I experienced this, and I was shocked, the number of parents that would call in to complain for their kids. You gave my child a 70. Why did you give her a 70? And actually, talking about that, I'm trying to hire, and I've actually had parents come to the interview as well. So I think there's some coaching now that needs to happen, not just with the student or the client, but maybe that client's parental guardians. Because I was shocked. I had get a call about maybe once or twice a week around, I don't want to use helicopter parenting, but or some, instead of the child or the client asking me why they failed a particular class, it's the parent asking me or demanding that we up their grade because they don't think it's fair. Which is that's a whole other, I don't know, did anyone else experience? Oh, okay, yeah. I'm hoping maybe it's not just a Canadian thing, but yeah.
I've heard of it. But
Yeah.
I've never heard
I heard of it, and when the first time I experienced it, I was shocked. Yeah, but that's a whole other thing. But all in all, it's interesting. So I didn't include in the presentation, but the two key metrics that, and I probably should have included this, the two key metrics that I was charged with, the KPIs I was charged with, was Net Promoter Score. So would the student, when they graduate, be willing to recommend? We were at a 40, and in some programs actually 0 Net Promoter Score. We've taken that now to a 100. So now, in the last graduating class, 100% of everyone gave us either a 9 or 10 on willingness to recommend. And so we're hoping that part of that was the coaching program. Another one too was cancel before start, so that pre-start. For some and the cancel before starts impacts post-secondary in that someone will go apply, get accepted, put their deposit down, and then come their first day, either no-show because they've gotten going somewhere else, or tell us within days. And it's really impactful for a school because, you know, you plan, do all this type of stuff, and then the student just is made, and we're seeing that now in post-secondary, not just in my school, but across BC, where it's in some places almost 30 to 40%. And that's significant, especially with the way funding is here in the province. So what we've seen now is a cancel before start rate for one program that was really high. It was almost like 45%. That's when the last intake was it was 0. We had no cancel before starts. And so our thought process is, and I don't know if it's validated or not, but just engaging them in a conversation helps alleviate some of that stress and really helps.
Is that because you're engaging before start or because you're getting a reputation?
I don't think it's reputation yet. I think it's probably because we're engaging them, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things is because it's more of a career-based college, it's all, our differentiator is you'll actually get a job versus a piece of paper. And so they come, but then in BC, there's a huge, they could go to Vancouver or Toronto and really get more in-depth. So how do we keep them into a smaller community like Kelowna? And the competition is fierce because, well, for film school, Vancouver Film School or Toronto Film School, it's the cat's ass at film schools. We're just Kelowna. But what our differentiator is that we'll actually work with you one-on-one, where if you go to one of the bigger schools, you're in a big room and you're not getting that individual one-on-one attention. So it'll be interesting to see what that is, and hopefully by next year I'll have more solid data to say, yeah, it's actually coaching making this impact, But I think also too the generations have changed. In my generation, it was okay to be in a classroom of 900, and we didn't really complain about it. It was just that's the way it is. This generation, what we're seeing is they want to be focused on how does this impact me? What's the bottom line for me? So it's a different approach, and hopefully one that is going to work. But part of, I don't know if we're still rolling, but part of the reason why I wanted to come here was around that conversation. How can we have different conversations, especially with this next generation coming up? Yeah.
Can you say a few words about the kind of coaching you did prior to this with people on banking, business impact? Was it similar?
It's very similar, in fact. And well, except I didn't have 15 minutes. I usually had an hour with the executives. And normally it was with either a regional executive or a senior executive. And the bank wanted, in Canada, are you from Canada? No. Okay, so in Canada we wanted to make banking comfortable with green chairs, and it was all about the personality of understanding your client. But for bankers, they were very focused on numbers and very focused on results. So what I would do is very similar, is you want to now not focus on the result, you want to focus on the experience that you provide that client. And so the coaching was very similar in terms of, okay, if that's the goal, what's your action? And so I held the CEO of BMO to the same standard I'm holding an 18-year-old. And I haven't changed that approach. Just now my beard's a little longer and I've got more tattoos, but that's about the only thing that's changed. And I show my tattoos now. I never did before in the banking industry.
And you say you had some encounter with Warren Buffett.
Yeah, that was really cool. So I don't know. I was speaking at a conference in Phoenix, and I go down there, and we had just come from Vegas, and the CEO of BMO, he couldn't make it out of Toronto because there was a snowstorm. Says, "Okay, Matt, can you give this presentation there?" And Warren Buffett's going to be there, and I didn't even know Warren Buffett was going to be there. Sorry. And so I go there, and of course, if you ever go, I'll show you, a banking conference, it's not just wine, it's like bourbon sours. It gets a little intense in terms of the alcohol. And two, we'd flown from Vegas there on the private jet, so of course the private jet had wine and bourbon, because that was what he loves. So when they introduced me to, because he was actually speaking, two speakers after me, I thought they said, Jimmy Buffett? So I'm like, I love Margaritaville! And he was, because I don't know what Jimmy Buffett looks like. Now I know what he looked like in the 70s. But yeah, he doesn't look like Warren Buffett. And actually, he was actually one of the nicest men I've ever met. And I forget her name, but the lady who was with him the whole time, absolutely fabulous. And it was just amazing, just how warmly welcome they stayed, and there must be hundreds of people at this place, and they stayed and talked to everybody. And it was interesting. He didn't smoke a cigar, but we were in the back room having cigars, and we were just talking about different things and different strategies, and he was very approachable, even for someone like me. We had maybe a 15-minute conversation around, at the time, because Canada was just going crazy and buying all of these US assets, and he was talking about, yeah, you buggers got banking right, and now you're taking advantage of us when we're down, which was kind of funny. So that was an interesting point. Yeah. So he was a really nice guy. I don't think I'll ever see him again, but.
Well, after the next crisis, you guys may.
Yeah, then we'll come back to it. Yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't go there.
How do you, one of the things I've struggled with either new employees or student employees,
Right.
even in a college town, whether it be high school or college,
Right.
is taking initiative
on
their own. Without
yeah.
being directed or,
yeah.
just small things. It's one of the most frustrating things.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes I encourage it, and I tell them, and I discuss it with them. But I sometimes feel like I'm talking to, say it's automaton, but like they need to be told task after task after task. Not
Constantly.
Good work, but it's just something.
I wish I had an answer for that. So that perfect example was the network security individual I was talking about, where I didn't think I was being successful at all, and then it wasn't until I graduated that these ideas started to come forward. So I don't know if I've answered that. One of the things that I start off my pre-start coaching with is what are you going to do to get to that self-directed mindset. So we talk about that in our very first session. You're probably used to, and I say this assumption, I just throw it out there, you're probably used to a very different way and model of learning in high school. That's not going to happen once you leave high school. You can't expect that same model and the same expectations once you leave, whether you go work for yourself or you go into university. So I challenge them, I say, okay, I'm going to just leave it out here. Self-directed mindset, go. It's interesting, some of them will get it, some of them will start researching it and start thinking about it, and then our follow-up sessions will come with a game plan. Others, they just sit there and they have no idea what I mean by self-directed mindset. But I still keep hammering home in every coaching session, okay, self-directed mindset, what does that mean to you? How do you take ownership for the things that you do? And I always come back to it. So I have no excuses, now what? Behind my desk. And so now it's almost like Pavlov's. I've coached them enough to the fact that most of the students now just go to, okay, I'm going to excuse. They know as soon as I do this with my beard that I'm getting annoyed with their story, and then it's going on, so what's the now what? And my hope is that as I move them to, okay, no excuses, now what are you going to do? That they will start self-thinking what's the next step that I should do versus coming to me for the next step. Because one of the things that what we found, because I replaced the previous department was a guidance counselor department. So you'd come in, cry, say your problem, and they'd tell you what to do. So it's been a cultural shift to go, no, you can come and cry if you want. I don't really give a shit. Like, you can cry all you want. Okay, now you've done your crying. Now what are you going to do about it? So it's a mind shift change. Maybe it's a bit colder, but it's more about preparing them for the real world isn't going to care either, right? So how do you get ready for that? Not that they don't care. Of course they care, but business leaders aren't going to sit there and care about the excuse. And so I don't know if that's the right approach yet, but it certainly has, for many of the students, have really helped and impacted them. So yeah, no excuses, now what, and how are you framing it? I think for me, it's my go-to. When I was working with the executives, I had a few more in my coaching toolkit, but now that I have 15 minutes, and it's in, especially with students, I wouldn't recommend more than 15 minutes because you lose them. And I also always have a call to action at the end. So it's never, okay, here's my, Matt's rant. It's always, here's some things to think about, and then a specific thing that I expect them to do next time we meet. Getting them into that mindset of, let's start working on something, let's start doing something. I don't know if does that answer your question?
It gives me some ideas.
It's yeah. I mean, we're stabbing at the dark. So right in the U.S., there is a similar. There are some coaching programs at post-secondary, but they're all remote. You phone in, and my experience is you have to look them in the white of the eye to really have more of an impact. Talking over the phone or over Skype is okay, but to actually get to know them and build that relationship with them, that's another thing too, in terms of similarities, is I'm not just in my office at my desk all the time, I'm out with the students, doing things with them, sitting in classrooms, so they see us as part of their team for success. Yeah, and I bought a popcorn machine. I know it's not, the school is like, are you nuts? And I pop popcorn on certain days. And what I find though is when they come for popcorn, I don't just give them a free bag of popcorn, but we ask them a coaching question. So what have you done? What are you doing differently? And now they come prepared and they've got their story because they want that bag of popcorn. And I use coconut oil too, so it's the good stuff. I'm not going cheap on them. And I get these nice ones. It's a big, fluffy things from the bulk barn. It's just, they love that kind of popcorn. Anyway, but I'm trying to think of different ways of engaging them so it's not just come into my desk, but it's more, as a coach, I also go up to them, which is another thing, because that's what I did too in the banking world. I didn't just, let's go coach in an office. I'd actually go into their area and go, oh, we're running out of time. Well, again, if anyone wants to continue, I've got my business cards here, but if anyone wants, I'd love to continue this conversation. So thank you so much.